We made this.
Engage!
Tea Earl Grey, hot.
There are times, sir, when men of good conscience cannot blindly follow orders. What we leave behind is not as important as how we live.
I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. Make it so.
Hello everyone and welcome to Make It So, a Star Trek Picard podcast from the We Made This podcast network. I am your host today, Kurt North. You'll soon notice that our captain, Tony Black, is not with us today. He's gone on to an away mission and has left me in command. So, of course, I've got to bring in someone else, which is fantastic. And I thought I would bring in a fellow commander in the space of Clara Cook. So, Clara, welcome to Make It So. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. I think you might have slightly elevated my rank because I'm pretty sure I'm a receptionist in Starfleet.
Right.
I don't think I could command a starship or be number one, unfortunately. I'm not good enough at maths and science.
So if you're a receptionist then, though, you get to look at a lot of nice models.
Yeah, I get to meet Picard, let's be honest. I mean, you know.
Especially when he says Picard. And then, but we'll get into that shortly. So welcome, Clara, to the podcast. You're our first guest on the podcast, and again, I just wanted to reiterate what Tony said last week. We really do thank everyone for all of their feedback that they've been giving us recently, and there's a great little basement. Same basement, that's an X-Cast thing. There's a great little Facebook group that's starting to develop on Facebook. So if you do want to find us, search Make It So, a Star Trek Picard podcast. There's quite a few things going on in there. And we're going to get into a mailbag later on at the end of the episode to talk about some of the comments that have been made, both on that Facebook group and on Twitter. So that'll be fantastic. But first of all, Clara, Star Trek. I'm guessing, I know that you're a fan of Star Trek. When did you first start watching it, and how did you, and what have you done around the Star Trek fandom?
I'm a huge Star Trek fan, massive Trekkie. I first started watching it as a very small child. I think I might have seen it, my first episode of Star Trek when I was about 4, and I think it was the original series. I must emphasise, not when the original series was first airing. I'm not that old. It was obviously a rerun. So I think I first saw that when I was very small, and I fell in love with Mr. Spock, and he was my favourite character for many, many, many years. And he was, I think, because back when I grew up, a lot of the characters that were really exciting and interesting to me were male characters, because there wasn't as many cool female characters. Yeah. So for me, it was like Spock and Tintin, like adventurous young men. Yeah. And then I sort of watched it all the way through my life. I obsessively read a whole load of novels when I was a kid, like TOS novels, some of the original ones that were written in the 70s and stuff, right, in the 80s. And then I didn't really know that many people that liked Star Trek. There were a few people I went to school with that kind of liked it, but weren't as obsessed with it as me. So it was quite a lonely existence, actually, liking this TV series and franchise. And also it wasn't seen as cool. It was seen as kind of like a geeky thing in my school. So yeah, I didn't go around telling people I was a real Star Trek fan. And then I always wanted to go to a convention, but I never ever went to one as a young person. And I went to university, didn't really meet any Star Trek fans there, just continued on through life. And then I went to an event at the London School of Economics, which is where I work. And I met Duncan Barrett, who is a podcast host on Trek FM of the Primitive Culture podcast, and author. He's written a book about Star Trek, so I'm sure a lot of people know him. And he gave a talk about Star Trek at the London School of Economics, which was really interesting. And then I started listening to Trek FM off the back of that, and started realizing that there was a huge online presence, and that there was this huge fandom out there. I mean, I knew there were a lot of fans, but there was a huge fandom out there of fans making their own stuff. Fans who were like producing, writing, producing, and making podcasts and writing fiction and everything. And then I thought to myself, wow, I have to get involved in this. And I ended up podcasting with Duncan for Trek FM. And I've gone to two conventions and interviewed some of the stars and podcasted with Tony and met Tony. And there's a lot of overlapping things. A lot of people that like Star Trek also like other shows. And so some of the fandoms overlap. And, I've made some real great friends through it. It's been amazing, really.
Yeah, I mean the connective tissue over fandoms, as you know, we have actually spoken before, just to put it out there, that this is our first podcast that we have recorded that will air. We've not podcasted together alone, but we have podcasted with other people, and I think there was 2 podcasts that we did, but unfortunately they never made it to air. But that was all through a link through Tony, as people know. Tony is the co-host with me on this podcast, and he also does the X-Cast, and that's obviously where we've kind of formulated that kind of friendship there. So. That connective tissue is something that is definitely there, and the online fandom is definitely something that people really hold on to, and it's great to be able to speak to people and to really get their get that collective feel and nature to it. I mean, both the X-Cast forum, for example, is fantastic, and hopefully the Star Trek one that we're doing here will be great to get people who we're aware of and we know, but also bring in new people. And as Tony said last week, it's an inclusive thing, Star Trek. So anyone that wants to join in, and may feel like you did, Clara, it's definitely something that I would really encourage and get involved and get in touch with us, because I think it's a wonderful thing. So that brings us to the podcast. So what were your thoughts on the first episode? What were your thoughts on Remembrance, just before we go into episode 2, which we're going to talk about shortly?
So I actually first saw the first episode at the Star Trek Picard premiere in London, about a week before it aired on Amazon. So I was I couldn't say much, obviously, because we were all embargoed. We weren't allowed to release any spoilers, and I don't want to spoil it for people. But I was immediately excited. And now I'm really happy that everyone's seen it, because now I can talk about it openly with people. Yeah. I loved the theme music. I loved the visuals. I thought it was really beautifully filmed. Just even the first couple shots with Data and Picard playing cards, it's just like 10 forward has never looked more, sparkling, and I felt that Patrick Stewart did a really good job of acting, more elderly than he maybe actually is, but also at the same time, there's still the Picard spirit there. There was this new element of like he's living with 2 Romulans, which was exciting. There's this kind of nostalgia as well that, when he goes into the archive and sees all this sort of stuff from TNG, but it wasn't too heavy on this nostalgia. I mean, you could watch it even if you weren't a fan of Star Trek and enjoy it. I just thought it was really great. I thought the script, I'm not saying that I don't appreciate the writers, but I wasn't sure how good the script was going to be, because there's some dialogue and Discovery that I wasn't massively fond of. I found myself wincing at. So I thought, is this script going to be a bit like the script of some of the episodes of Discovery? There's a lot of very good episodes of Discovery, but some I found hard to kind of grasp. And I was really impressed. I thought the script was really good. It was kind of slightly sparse, it wasn't too over the top. There was a lot of stuff that was referenced and implied without much dialogue. And then when the dialogue was there, it was, well written, I think. So I really enjoyed it. I wanted more. I felt like the first episode finished and the whole audience in the cinema was like, oh. They were like, more.
Yeah, well, I think in LA they got to see all 3 episodes, didn't they, of the first 3? So it was just a bit I can imagine just going, I want more. And we do get more. We get more, and we had, which was debuted on Thursday the 30th of January. So just this week, which was episode 2, which is Maps and Legends. It was written by Michael Chabon and Akiva Goldsmith and directed again by Hanel Culpepper. What did you think of Hanel's direction then? You mentioned about how it was beautifully filmed and stuff. What did you think of her direction in the first episode?
I thought it was wonderful. I thought the actors were completely emotionally on point. I felt like it all seemed quite natural, but it's also very cinematic, you know, and there was these lots of landscapes and wide open shots. I thought the reveal of the Borg cube was just brilliant, because she really takes her time doing that. It's quite long. It's a long shot, and you're thinking, where is this going? And then you're like, oh my God. And then you're like, why are people in a Borg cube? Like, dudes, no, just get out of there.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to spend any time in there, would you, at all? Even if it is disconnected from the Borg Collective. So talking about this episode then, what are your general thoughts on Maps and Legends, and what would you rate this out of 10? Now, this was a question that Tony asked me last week, and we've discussed about, you know, being on the Xcast and my Millennium podcast that I do, that, you know, we've got time and distance, and we can look subjectively and objectively at it. We can look objectively at it because we've got a whole piece. But with this, we've got 10 episodes, and it's just a full story arc, so it's difficult to kind of give it a rating. But as a single 45-minute piece of television, what would you rate this out of 10, and what are your thoughts on it?
I think I would probably give it something like 8 out of 10, maybe. It's quite high. I think part of the reason why I give it 8 out of 10 is a lot of it's to do with the opening scene, and opening scene, and then also the scene where they go to the apartment and they do this sort of detective deduction. Yeah. I quite enjoyed that. There's different elements of the episode that feel like they fit into different genres. I wouldn't give it 10 out of 10 because, like we said, it's hard. Like it's one episode in a story arc, so it's not a standalone episode. So it's hard to sort of judge it on its own merits. And I wouldn't give it 10 out of 10 partly because there was a little bit too much posturing from the Romulans for me. But I suspect that they're going to continue to do that because they are basically drama queens. So
yeah, they are. They are very drama queenish, aren't they? But yeah, I mean, I personally, I said this off air to you that I rated last week as 9. I was probably a bit excited at that point, and I'd probably give it an 8.5 out of 10 for last week, really. But this week, I think I've managed to watch this episode twice now. On the first viewing, whether or not it was the high has kind of gone a little bit, that I felt a bit more like it was solidifying a lot of things. So I felt like there was a lot of exposition. There was a lot of things that they've fitted into 45 minutes of TV. But also that it's kind of like it does feel like a second part of a 3-part story in some ways now, and I can probably see why. And we don't know what the third episode is going to sound like or look like, but the second episode felt like it was very much a second act in some ways, and there was a lot of information in there. I agree with you. The mystery CSIE kind of techno babble stuff in that scene in the apartment was particularly interesting, and I enjoyed that. And overall, I think I would echo your score and give it an 8 out of 10. So it's and I did love aspects of this, and I'm going to hopefully over the next few days watch both 1 and 2 back to back, and I'll probably do that for the next few weeks of slowly developing the story, but then watching the episodes back to back. So should we look a bit further into the episode?
Without a doubt. Affirmative. Okay. Make it so.
Okay, so we do start on Utopia Planitia 2385. We have a date. That is, I thought that was fantastic. I saw that date pop up and I was like, yes, right, okay, we've got a definite date now. Have you been reading the comics as well?
I haven't. I actually haven't. And then I saw somebody on Twitter mentioned that it sort of explains the 2 Romulans living with Picard. So I was like, right, I'm going to download those right away.
Yeah, they do. I won't go into too much detail because you haven't seen it, but the comic kind of follows a lot of what they do, and especially in the third countdown comic, there's a lot more to them, and a lot more that features with Laris and Zaban in this particular episode as well. So I think it's been interesting seeing people react, because I've said in the past that I've not been a massive external reader of comics and novels and things like that. I've generally just gone off the TV show. So it's been interesting being on the other side of the fence, knowing that I've read the 3 comics and, seeing people going, who are these Romulans? What are they doing? Why are they there? Who are these random people? Where's Troy? Where's Beverly Crusher? Where is she? So it's been interesting to see it from that point of view as well. But yeah, it does give some good backstory. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. So we are on Utopia Planitia, and I thought that Mars particularly looked really good. I thought that was really well played. But we do get to meet F8. Now, what did you think of this scene then? Because we get similar to what we did with the Borg cube. There's like a pull in before we get into the into the actual yards themselves, don't we? And then we get the whole plastic people kind of description in F8 just before he does turn. What did you think to that?
I mean, I loved it. I think that it really raises a whole bunch of questions which are often addressed in science fiction, have been addressed in something like Battlestar Galactica, in Blade Runner, have been addressed in Star Trek as well, like The Measure of a Man, that TNG episode about, whether or not Data is sentient, does he have rights? I think it's great. It's a great theme, I mean, it's shown again and again that humanity is creating these machines that look and act and impersonate humanity, but then they don't really like that, they kind of do that and then they're like, either the machine's not human enough or it's too human and it's disturbing. And I think that I thought the first line that Pincus says, I think that the first piece of dialogue, apart from like the announcements about First Contact Day, the first piece of dialogue being like, good morning, plastic people, was great because it just shows how much contempt for these, machines or these androids. I would say beings more than machines. How much contempt human beings have for these beings, and how eventually, your disrespect for something that's sentient, will lead to something bad. And I think, I had this long conversation with Duncan about this on a podcast for Primitive Culture, and he was talking about how his little son will say thank you to Alexa, the Amazon AI, right?
Yeah.
And how that he's showing respect to this machine. He sort of talks to Alexa in the same way that he would talk to the family dog. But the whole idea is that if something's sentient, you shouldn't abuse it. Like, we shouldn't really abuse anything, machinery, human, animal, And really, technically, what they're doing is, it's like workplace discrimination, but it's discrimination against an android. Yeah. And I think it's just a sign of things to come. It's almost like human hubris has led to this situation where F8, there's all the F8s or all the F, whatever, whether they're numbered differently, I don't know. But, where if you treat these creatures with disrespect, they're eventually going to rebel, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting you say about the Alexa thing. Luckily, I've got the other assistant because I've just realised my other assistant is sitting next to me, so I better not mention that one. But yeah, it's interesting because I had this strange conversation with my girlfriend a couple of weeks ago actually, where we've got control over the lights in the house and things like that, where she'll say something very straightforward, but I generally talk to it in a more speaking terms rather than, not literally saying thank you to it, but actually just speaking in a more natural way, where she speaks in a very clipped way. And I said, you can just talk to it normally. You don't have to sort of do things. But going back to Star Trek, Star Trek Picard, obviously, I think it's natural for Star Trek to do this because you've got episodes. You mentioned The Measure of the Man there, which I would really, if anyone hasn't seen Measure of the Man and have come to Picard just now, I would definitely recommend seeing that episode. One, it's got issues with Brooks Maddox in, like you've discussed, but it's also got this whole idea, like you've said, of sentience and but the question was, is Data sentient? Is he alive? How do we know if he's alive? How do you classify what life is? And Picard, has to basically protect Data in a courtroom kind of thing. And a lot of these issues are raised up in that episode, isn't it? Because there's things like, when does it become a slave race, etc. But there's also episodes like, I think it's called The Quality of Life with the X-Comps as well, where there's like robots that are going into a mining shaft and, there's Data believes that they may have become sentient. They can't talk or anything, but the way that they deal with stuff is, it's kind of, gives that impression that they are sentient. So it's not something that Next Generation, hasn't done before. But I like that that's seeding through into this new show, and they're using the back of that, really. I think it's really good.
Yeah, and I mean the Doctor, in Voyager, this is the implication that the Doctor could be used, like holograms could be used, and we did see in the first episode a hologram was an archivist,
Yeah.
And that's like basically a computer program. I mean, that's I would say even more esoteric than an android. It's not a physical form. It's a computer program that basically projects, I guess, a visual representation of something, like using light or whatever, like it's or lasers or whatever. So it's a hologram. So, but I think there's this idea that, what it is, ties very much into Star Trek. Like, what is it to be human? And what is it like to behave like a human, to want to be like a human when you're not a human, like Data, or in the case of Spock, like trying to sort of erase your humanity so that you can fit in with a different identity. I think that the problem with this scene is that it really seems like the F8 synth unit is you being used as a servant, and a servant that's not respected, and a servant that is pretty much almost abused, and that has no form of self-determination. And the question is, when the F8 unit basically goes rogue, is that self-determination, or were the F8s like programmed by some external nefarious force to go rogue? And there is that one woman who does sort of seem to care. She says, he can hear you. But she seems more kind of wary of him than actually emotionally invested in in caring about, or being friends with the F8. And the F8 is weird looking. Like he doesn't look like Data. He doesn't have like hair, and he's doesn't sort of have that sort of jocular walk that I'm sure Data's imitating to fit in with humans. Like he's very computerized, isn't he? He's very robot-like. But
yeah, I mean,
still,
they mentioned that in the last episode, didn't they? That they weren't ever quite able to recreate Data. It was always like a class below, and it wasn't sentient life and thing. But what you're saying about the making them feel off, I thought they used that really well. The fact that I think the actor who plays F8 did that really well. The way that he mimicked the smile and listened to the jokes and responded in kind of like a Data mindset in some ways when they would turn the joke and he didn't understand it. But it was really off-putting the way that he smiled and the way that happened.
Yeah, it was really off-putting. That and the fact that he just parrots back to that woman like, hell yeah. He just parrots it back to her almost in the same accent and tone of voice, and it is supposed to be creepy. I think human beings they're sort of torn between having conformity, but also at the same time they want individuality too. And if the machine is not individual enough to appear to be sort of unique, then that, I think, sort of seems creepy. But at the same time, they don't want a machine that's so, I don't know, machine-like that it doesn't appear human. It's interesting that the Federation would allow a whole bunch of androids to be made in a human way, to look like humans, and then to be used as a workforce, as opposed to any other sort of android choice they could have made, like any other type of android, making something that's not humanoid. Making something that's a little less... I wonder what the purpose of making him look so human was if they're not going to treat him like a human. That really... And I thought, you know what, you guys, this is... You're heading for disaster. I was like, this is definitely not going to work out well.
The one thing I will say, because Bruce Maddox potentially is involved in the making of them, because obviously we've seen the Daystrom interview, and... Maddox in Data's day was turned around to a character where Data was actually relaying information about what he's doing, and at the end of Measure a Man basically says that continue your work, you've got some good things going on here. And I do feel there's some the androids themselves. I know what you're saying with they were very kind of like straight stand up ish and very kind of robotic and but with this human looking. But it did feel like, Data's creator was Dr. Noonien Sung, so it did feel a little bit like a Noonien Sung android, but just not quite as developed, I thought. I also just want to bring on, you mentioned First Contact Day now. First Contact was, I think it was 23, whatever year it was, but the film First Contact deals with it, and it's been mentioned a few times. And Children of Mars, for example, which we covered, is based around this day, this event. And it was interesting to find out that they were doing a skeleton crew, and I thought whether or not were these droids, are they kind of like packed away and only used when they've got staff shortages, or have they brought them out in en masse on this particular day? Is that the reason why they were attacking at this particular day? Because there was skeleton crew, people who enjoying themselves, and because First Contact is the first contact of an alien race between humans and aliens, which were the Vulcans. But what were the reasons for that? Was it a definite, well, this is a date that's going to hit them really hard because it's First Contact Day? Or was it a convenient thing because they were working on skeleton staff, and they were using the synths as a slave workforce for this particular day? Is that how you viewed it?
I felt that it was a convenient day to attack because there were less humans in the shipyards. I don't think that they're using the synths to cover the human workload. I felt like they use the synths every day.
Yeah.
And I felt like they probably use them a lot for stuff that's like in the atmosphere of Mars, like outside the building, places where humans can't go without protective clothing or whatever, which probably costs more money. I don't know. I thought there was a cost-saving element here, which really disturbed me because I was like, this is the Federation, it's a utopia. Money doesn't mean anything. And then you see what like crappy food they're getting out of like crappy little replicators, and you're like, oh damn, this is like low wage work. This is 0-hour contracts. But anyway,
yeah.
I read way too much into it. And then my husband had turned to me and said, who are these people? And why are they eating food like this? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, this is like low-level staff in the Federation. But I guess I felt that synths were used all the time, but that the reason why they may have picked this day for the shipyards to be attacked was because there was less humans aboard, so less resistance, maybe, perhaps. Although I don't see how humans could resist them because they're pretty efficient killing machines. I wondered if they were programmed to be that way for this particular day, because the ships that are firing on them looked like alien ships to me. So I thought they were programmed to bring down the defences and to kill people in the actual buildings, but that the actual attack from above was coming from ships. But I maybe read too much into
I think it was I thought the way I saw it was the orbital defence that had been turned round. That was that because we think about Wolf 359, which was when Picard had turned into the Borg Locutus. That the Wolf 359 was basically an attack on Mars, and they mention it in that episode where they say they've cracked the Mars orbital defence. And I thought that was the programming, changing the orbital defence network around and attacking them from that point of view. But the ships are an interesting one because I keep thinking, what weapons have they got on those ships if they're just like mining ships or, whatever ships they need to use?
Yeah, or maybe the ships were ships that were taking off and trying to escape and shooting at the shipyard because, they knew the area had been overtaken. Or maybe they were ships full of synths who'd had gone in there and programmed. And I guess they may explain it. I assume they're going to explain it in the series. But they may not explain every detail in the scene, I guess. So some of it might be left to our imagination.
Yeah, which I think is a great thing to do, because I personally would prefer that than being told every single detail, personally. Yeah,
I'm not a person who needs to be shown everything in order to... I don't mind some stuff being left to our imagination. I guess I really feel, though, that this episode was giving us a strong message about sentient life. Regardless of whether it's artificial or not, or it's biological or artificial, and sort of saying that, all sentient life is important, and that it's worth protecting, and that the people in the beginning don't deserve to die, obviously. They should be protected too, but that they're not. I mean, the synths are kept in a giant room, just standing there. You know, Data had quarters. He had music and art and friends and a cat. You know, and the synths have none of that, and obviously they're not as intelligent or as developed as Data, but they're being treated as drones, and actually they're not unlike Borg drones. I think even the Borg are probably more appreciated by other Borg than these guys were.
yeah. At least they get to talk to each other.
Yeah.
So one final thing on this scene before we move on. This happened in Star Trek Discovery as well. I can't remember her name, the robot in Star Trek Discovery.
Arian?
Yeah, that's the one, yeah. So,
but she was human, though, wasn't she? She was like part human.
Augmented, wasn't she? That's the word I'm looking for.
She was like a cyborg or whatever.
Yeah. But she seemed to be hacked, and F8 here seems to be hacked as well. So it kind of echoes what happened in Discovery here, that where his eyes flickered. And it seems like something either activated him or a signal was sent to him, and that's what kind of flicked everything around. Now, this makes me feel that, which we'll get into shortly, that the Jatvash are involved. I don't know what you thought of this kind of like the eyes flickering and, you know, having it seems like he was activated.
Yeah, it definitely seemed like he was activated, and I think that is something that they use in Star Trek Discovery and also with this, because it's a very frightening idea that the machine or the sort of android or the augmented human who's standing beside you, who's there to help you, that you are safe around, can suddenly be switched into like a killing machine by some external force. I think it's a terrifying idea, and I think that's why they put it in, because it's like creeps the audience out. But yeah, I agree with you. I think he was triggered by something.
Yeah, and then at the very end, once because he's very efficient. You're right, with efficient killing machine. You know, he doesn't even have to look, which is great. But yeah, then we've got at the very end of the scene is when he shoots himself, and I think that's really relevant, because if they've programmed them, if there'll be no evidence of what or who's done that, and I think that was a really effective way of leaving that story hanging, really.
It's actually quite a sad scene. Like, when the first man had his neck broken, my husband was like, oh, God, like in Star Trek, you know? And I was like, oh, sweet summer child, just wait till you watch Discovery. But, like, you know, like, it's actually really horrible. He kills him, and he kills him in kind of graphic, horrific ways. And then he kills himself. I was like, man, this is tragedy in the first, like, 2 minutes of the episode. It's like, damn, what an opener.
Yeah, and I think it was effective. I think it was nice to get this backstory, this opening scene. It really kind of digs down. This is what I mean by feeling it's a second act, really. It's really developing what we've already seen, and I think this is the first example, and a really good example of how they're doing that. We move into the vineyard, go back to the Picard's vineyard, and from the last episode, we saw that the Daj was destroyed, that Picard has decided that he's not going to continue to lie down. He's going to find out what happened and why Daj was killed, and he wants to find Soji, who we see at the end of the last episode in the Borg cube. So this is an interesting scene, because we get quite a lot of exposition here, but it also flicks between the vineyard and Daj's apartment, and we get a lot of cross script work, and I thought that the editing was really, really good here, because it kind of jumped between the two, which led me to feel quite the way that it was done was effective, because you're not getting a long monologue piece between the three characters in one area. You're getting like little bits of information. My question to you would be, what did you think of this scene? And then the Jatvash are a new concept in Star Trek lore, Star Trek canon as such. And the Romulans were already known as the secret police, like Laris says. What did you think to this new element that the Romulans have got this ancient cabal within their midst, and they spread among the worlds, really? What did you think to that?
I liked it. I think that the idea of a secret sort of dogmatic, obsessive faction of society exists that, is rumoured, but also people are kind of frightened of it, but actually it's actually real, is effective and good. And it sort of fits in with the Romulans, who are a secretive race of aliens as it is. I also like the idea that they may have kind of been more active and sprung up now that, their homeworld has technically basically been destroyed. So the Romulans themselves are this sort of desperate culture now, so they're starting to get more ruthless maybe, and sort of infiltrating the Federation. And they have a perfect right to dislike the Federation. They have a perfect right to infiltrate, obviously. But, do you know what I mean? I can see the resentment against the Federation and wanting to basically interfere and manipulate Federation politics and Starfleet would fit with where they are at the moment. I think it's really good that Laris and Saban represent either side of the argument. So Saban's like, they are just a myth, this is ridiculous, you're being paranoid. And Laris is very, sort of insistent that they do exist and that she actually can prove it. So I think that was good, because that sort of is the audience. The audience is like, what? This secret, organization that we never heard of, is this really true? What are they doing? And then Laris is the other side of the audience, which are like, oh yeah, this makes complete sense, And I think the way, like you're saying, the way they cut between the scenes was really effective. It kept the story flowing quite at a good sort of prompt pace, rather than being stagnant in one room. And also, I loved the stuff to do with the computer. And I'm not a big technobabble fan. I honestly am not a fan of a lot of the technobabble in Star Trek, specifically in Voyager. It really bothers me when Janeway is like, we can solve this by talking about the emitters doing the hyper blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh my God, just write some decent, some decent dialogue. But this I felt like actually had a place, because it didn't feel like technobabble. It felt like computer science. It felt like computer espionage or computer investigation. It felt like they were actually using the computer rather than using, I don't know, some sort of random...
Yeah, it's like a MacGuffin, isn't it? Normally it's just like, oh, we'll use this technobabble to get around this issue so we can get from A to B to C. Now, it does do that, but it feels more... I mean, Michael Chabon actually writes a lot of mystery these kind of novels, doesn't he? So I think that's definitely his element of bringing this mystery kind of thing in, and we are moving from A to B to C, but it's not as MacGuffin-y as certain other episodes where all of a sudden, oh, look, I've got this that can finally find out the key to the episode. And I think that's a really important part, really.
And there is this, I mean, I can't help but feel, I could be wrong, but every time they talk about twins, I'm like, there's more than one twin. I'm sure there is. And the reason why I think that is when Data's playing in the first episode, playing with Picard, and he puts down his 5 queens, right? And you can't get 5 queens in a pack of cards. You just can't. So, and obviously, one of those queens could be Lal, Data's original daughter, and then I think the other 4 queens are 2 sets of twins. So what's the interesting thing about this is we all assume he's going to the Borg cube and he's going to find her there, but maybe she's a different twin, and so the entire time when they were like, oh, she's an off-world sister, I'm like, but how many? I'm like, which off-world sister? Have we seen them all? I mean, I could be wrong, but that's my theory.
Well, I said that to Tony last week, actually. I said that it's because we were talking about Q and QQ, as in the Q, which we talked about last week, that a lot of people online are saying, are we going to see a return of John Delancey's Q? And then obviously that kind of moved on to the Borg Queen. Is this got something to do with the Borg Queen? And I positioned myself in that, do we have, because there's 5 Queen of Hearts, and I was going to say Laris then, no, that's long. Soji and Daj were 2, and I was with you. But I think you've put it more eloquently in that you can't get 5 queens in a pack, but they were all Queen of Hearts as well, so you can't get 5 Queen of Hearts either.
Yeah, and Picard's reaction, the reason why I say this is they deliberately put in Picard's reaction to the actual hand. He looked confused. He was like, what? And why would they do that? Why would they draw our attention to that unless it meant something?
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to pay off at some point, and I think it's really good. I think it's really good because this is the sort of thing I was saying by leaving things hanging or open, that, you know, I'm a big fan of Twin Peaks, and there was Twin Peaks is a whole kind of different ball game, but the beginning was the fireman saying Richard and Laura, and you still don't by the end of the season really quite get what that is, but it was an open mystery for the whole entire show, and I think if they do that with these queens of heart, and it gets paid off in, say, episode 8 or episode 9 or something, then I think it would work really well. While we were talking about Laris and Zaban there, I think overall rather than scene by scene, what did you think of them overall in this episode? Because last episode they were very much the caring, almost like Butler-esque kind of, you know, they're looking after Picard. But here you get Laris going out into the field with Picard and showing that they are Tal Shiar, they're very, very capable agents. And you get Zaban, who offers quite a lot of levity to some of the scenes as well. What did you think to their character traits in this episode?
I mean, I thought they were great. I really loved Laris. I mean, I loved the sort of... Are we allowed to swear on this podcast? I don't know.
Yeah, go for it.
I love it when she said cheeky fuckers. She said that, right? Am I just imagining it? I was
there's a debate going on. Did she say feckers or fuckers?
Yeah, I mean, the subtitles say fuckers, but...
Yeah.
I mean, Ben was like, how is she Irish? Ben's my husband. He's like, how is she Irish? I was like, she learned English from an Irish English speaker, like from a teacher. That's you know, it's like when somebody learns, like, you know, English from like an American, and then they speak English with an American accent, and you're like, wow.
But on that though, of course that Narek is English. It has to be English, isn't it? Because he's technically evil.
Because he's evil. I kind of like a posh English accent as well. No, I loved her. I thought she was feisty. I thought she stood her ground. She doesn't take, you know, any shit from her husband or from Picard. She's also technically, you know, sort of brilliant, really. She's been doing all the computer stuff. I think that they obviously, I'm sure we'll find this out, but they obviously owe Picard a debt. I assume it's saving their lives and protecting them. And they care about him. Perhaps maybe they wanted a life where it was a little more peaceful towards the older days of their lives, and that's why they want to be on the vineyard. But I think they are both naturally secretive, and I think that's because Romulans are naturally secretive, just like Cardassians are naturally, how do I put this, like, their society is very militaristic. And, you know, they are quite ruthless. I'm not saying that obviously we should generalize by alien race. Obviously there's different people and doing different things, but you know, where the Klingons are all about honor and the Vulcans are all about, you know, repressing logic, repressing of emotion and meditation. It would make sense, I think, that the Romulans, I didn't know they were such drama queens, but I'm here for it, because the Vulcans are kind of like drama queens as well, and they're all related to each other. So, but like, I can see how they might have a naturally secretive society, you know. So the idea that these two people who were caring for him in episode 1 turn out to be like ex-government agents who have all these hidden skills that they don't exhibit to the public or on a regular basis, actually seemed totally fine. I mean, I've seen some people online being like, oh, how convenient it is that he's living with... I was like, well, guys, I got to tell the story in like, what, 45, 50 minutes? Like, give him a break.
I mean,
they need some plot devices.
Yeah. Well, as I say, from sitting on this side of the fence, like I would have been on that side of the fence, but I've read the comics, and the comics do explain why. This is no spoiler because they're talking about it here, but they were Tal Shiar, and it's no spoiler that Picard finds that out. So the story around that is really interesting. So you've got that background information, but I can see from the point of view of you've got a tight 45-minute thing to explain that it isn't convenient because of the way the story plays in on the comics. But I can totally see from a TV watching point of view that you would feel that. I think Zaban for me, I actually really like, and I love the comic timing. Especially when he says, you can't do this alone. He says something like, oh, we'll go with you. And she just hits him. It's like, no, what are you doing? It's stupid. But yeah, I thought that they both really play well off each other. He's very, very caring. and she's a bit more pragmatic, and I really like that dynamic that they've got, and I think it really works. And and I think that Zban just feels like he's the emotional core of that, and as I say, with the bouncing off them, which I thought worked really well. Now, the only issue that I've got, and it's only because I watched it recently when I was going through my Star Trek Next Generation, because I was watching a lot of the Romulan episodes and the Borg episodes generally. That's what I tended to watch before the run-up, was this thing where they're saying that, and I understand why they're doing it, and it's a very small point. It's not something that's going to throw me off at all, but the Zhat Vash are totally against synthetic life. That's the one that feels a bit pushed and forced to me. But then they mentioned about this secret that will break minds. Did you catch that? And what do you think about this loathing for the synthetic life?
I don't know. I just feel like, I could be wrong, but I feel like it has some sort of connection to, it's fear, isn't it? And it has, but yeah. I feel like it has some sort of connection to self-loathing. I wonder if somewhere along the line the Romulans used artificial life to somehow propagate their species or something, like I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Or something to do with the Borg. I feel like the Borg are definitely going to come into it, but there's got to be some reason. And
there are running theories online where they're saying that thousands of years ago the Romulans are the reason why the Borg exist, which is like, well, I can't see that, because the Borg were based in the Delta Quadrant, and I can't see the Romulans being in the Delta Quadrant.
Also, thousands and thousands or millennia or whatever. Weren't they on Vulcan? Aren't they? They're a subsect of Vulcan society that left because they wanted to maintain or keep emotion and reject logic. I feel that it can't just be an outright fear of technology. I feel like they did something, maybe not start the Borg, but they did something. They used technology. They went too far in one direction in using technology. It led to something terrible, and now they have to, go back. And I think I'm kind of okay with that fear of the Zhat Vash having that fear. I feel like, in my mind, I'm just making this up, but the Zhat Vash probably in the past were seen as sort of crazy, extreme weirdos in
kind of like the
Tal
Illuminati, Illuminati type thing.
Just like the extreme kind of obsessive, and maybe sort of not taken massively seriously by the Romulan, I guess you could say, government or Romulan Secret Service, military, whatever. But now they rose to prominence, and now they have much more of an active role within this, secret Romulan sort of spy force.
Yeah. I mean, the only issue that I personally have is, and as I say, it's a small piece, but I watched, I think it's called The Defector, and the Romulan on that says, talks to Data and says stuff like, oh, our cyberneticists are going to be really interested in analysing you, Data, kind of thing. And it's like, well, if the Romulan culture are that against synthetics, then why would they have cybernetic divisions? Because they're saying about the Romulan culture, they're not just saying about the Zhat Vash. They're talking about, that if you look in all their computers, all their AI stuff, it's all based on numbers and numerical things, and they don't have very much AI around them and things like that. But there's a conflict there, and I've spoken to Tony about this generally. That it's a throwaway for me. It doesn't really matter. But there is, I can see people pointing to that particular episode and saying, well, wait a second, the Romulans did have cyberneticists and things like that. So that's just a small point.
But I guess in any society, there's always going to be people who are more open-minded than others, aren't there? There's a general theme running through this entire show about, after something awful, people turning away from each other and people fearing something and making something a scapegoat. And I mean, let's be honest, a lot of that probably comes from Patrick Stewart and his political opinions, which I don't find offensive because they're quite similar to mine. But I mean, I suppose somebody else might find them offensive. But it is also the theme of Star Trek, like challenging those prejudices and those biases people have. And so it doesn't surprise me that in this series, maybe the Federation is biased against the Romulans and the Romulans are biased against artificial life forms. Basically, everybody's looking to hate something, aren't they? And Picard is going to save them all and teach them love. Anyway.
Fantastic. Finally, on this scene, just something that the one thing that threw me a little bit with this episode, and I feel it might be an editing thing, that when we do go through the whole phone records and they're looking for the twins, and and I get all that, I understand all that your assistant will look at you and think, oh, there's Kurt, fantastic. Oh no, it's Kurt's twin brother, and then that's logged, and that's how they found out that the messages are being sent through subspace, which means that Soji is off world. The way that Picard reacts is the way that Picard would react, because he hasn't seen what we've seen. But I personally feel that doesn't have the resonation that it should have, but it would have had we seen this scene before the Borg cube last episode. It just feels like it feels like the editings maybe has been moved around a little bit.
Yeah, I felt like Picard's reaction was like, fuck yeah, I gotta go back into space. But it was a little muted because we already know he's going back into space, don't we?
Yeah.
It would have been maybe slightly better if we didn't see the cube, so we thought Soji was actually on Earth somewhere in some dark, cavernous computer building or something, rather than the Borg cube. Because then now you're fearing for Picard, but perhaps you were fearing for him at the beginning of the episode because you're like, at some point he's going to end up on this cube. But if they showed the cube after that reveal, then the end of the episode you'd be like, oh, no, Picard's going to go into space.
I mentioned this last episode that I'm sure that the Picard in a uniform thing didn't come to quite some time into the production. But then we get that in the very first scene, the second dream sequence, where he's back in the TNG uniform. So I feel that there's been some, and this is the way you can do it with obviously a 10-story arc, that you can move things around a little bit. And I think that they've maybe done that a little bit with that scene. It's only us guessing, of course, but that's the way I felt. Either that, as you say, it just didn't have that so much of an impact that, we find out where Soji is on a Borg cube, then Picard finds out after us, which not necessarily finds out the Borg cube, but finds out that she's in outer space.
Yeah, and I think sometimes they make these decisions because they're like, we want to end this episode on a cliffhanger because we want people to watch next week, and so I think that they probably do make these decisions for artistic reasons, but also I think for like commercial reasons too.
Yeah,
like, we've got to leave on a big reveal.
Yeah, to balance.
Yeah.
To balance, isn't it? Right, so we've been talking about the Borg cube. We're here. We're at the Borg cube. We rejoin Narek and Soji from, as you said, the cliffhanger from last episode. There's a few things here that I find really interesting. I really enjoyed the conversation between Narek and Soji in bed. I thought that the questions and answer back and forth, and the way that Narek was responding to them in all these kind of secrecy terms, things like, that I'm not sure, that we definitely need to keep this secret, but also some of the ways that it was quite playful. I thought that the script was brilliant on that aspect. I also want to pick up on the way that Soji says basically a subversion of what the Borg philosophy is. The Borg Queen would say something along the lines of, we're seeking perfection. And I think says that to Data in First Contact, the film. But she says she finds beauty in the imperfection. And then she talks about the Borg being omnipotent, and that the artifact is lost, and it's broken. And the way that Narek says, things like, do you find beauty in that's where it comes from. It says, do you find beauty in broken vulnerability? And she says, I find beauty in imperfection. What did you make of all that in there? Because that's really, really interesting in my eyes.
Well, first of all, before we start talking about that, I want to do a little shout out to Star Trek for thank you showing a consensual sex scene. I mean, it's not actually a sex scene, but showing consensual people, presumably consensual sex, because I had this long podcast with Duncan, which hasn't aired yet, but it's all about sexual assault in Star Trek. It will be going out on Trek FM at some point. And we both came to the conclusion that Star Trek shows non-consensual sex a lot more than it shows consensual sex, which we didn't feel was always a good thing. So actually, I mean, historically throughout the franchise, so actually Star Trek's been quite prudish about showing anything consensual. So to show these two characters in bed together, who obviously are happy to be in bed together, was, I think, a very good step. I love the idea that she thinks imperfection is beautiful because she's perfect. And she just doesn't. Yeah. She just doesn't know it. Like, she can, presumably if she's an artificial life form, she's not going to age or die. She's, if she's like a sister or a twin sister or her other twin sister or any of the twin sisters, she's very good at fighting, physically, just superior, incredibly intelligent. So she is perfect, pretty much, right? Beautiful and everything. And the idea that she's in this sort of eroded artificial structure that was recently efficient and perfect, or at some point efficient and perfect, it's just a real contradiction, isn't it? It's a beautiful kind of contradiction. I like the idea as well that she's not frightened of being there. She's not frightened of the Borg, and she's, even though she doesn't know what she is, I assume, she is not freaked out by being there, not scared about being there, she's not really questioning it as much, I suppose, but she just sort of going on instincts, kind of. Whereas Narek, I think, like the other human I say non-artificial life form, the other biological life forms that we don't have to invent a whole new language to talk about Star Trek Picard, aren't we? Without being derogative to androids. And, all of them seemed, I think, more freaked out, or they're having more of an emotional response to it, whereas she seems to be more gentle about it, and so I really like that conversation. I also felt that Narek is probing her for information, but doing it in quite a subtle way that, no pun intended, doing it in a subtle way that she, doesn't realise it. And this is the other thing as well, right? So if Romulans hate artificial life forms, if he's some sort of spy, or he's, part of the cause to destroy all artificial life forms, why would you sleep with one? Do you know what I mean? Like, if they look like humans and you're treating them like humans, then you can't be upset when they want to be human. Do you know what I mean? Like if you give Data art and music and you treat him like everybody else, then if he wants to be like everybody else, you can't object to that. Do you know what I mean? So you're making these machines just like you, and then you're unhappy when they are turning out to want to be like you. So so I felt that was so interesting. I thought, is he going to fall in love with her? Is he going to betray his mission? What's he going to do? Or maybe he just thinks she's a tool. I'm just going to use her like a tool, which would be horrific, but maybe that's what the case is.
Well, I think the way that they're setting this up, I personally, and I'm sure you might agree with this, that he's going to be quite an interesting character in that he's going to be jumping between both that and both things that you've just said. I think that he will have to make a choice at the end of the day where his loyalties lie, and he's going to be the one that's feeling most ambivalent towards what they're doing, and I think that I'm really interested to see how that's going to play out, because Picard, we know what Picard is. We know that where he's going to go. We don't know where Sudge is going to turn up, and that's intriguing in its own way. But everyone else that we met, like Jurati, who's got a vested interest, but he's the one where he can go either way, and they can play with that quite a bit. And I think that that's going to be really interesting over the arc.
And we know so much more about the Borg now as well, so like it would be easy just to think of the Borg as villains. And I think obviously in some of the earlier TNG episodes, we did think of the Borg as these machines, almost like insects, they're all behaving with a hive mind. You just got to crush them, destroy them. They're going to assimilate us and just take over everything and erase our individual personality. But we now have had 7 of 9. We've had Hugh. We've had the other children in the Voyager, who were Borg. And we know it's complicated. Like, they're still people. They may be part of the hive mind. Maybe their personalities are diminished. And so that sort of empathy that Soji is showing to the Borg drones is actually, I think, what some people probably would feel, because, we've had many more Borg stories where the Borg have become more complicated and it's less black and white.
Yeah, and I think that what I think they've got the balance right here is that we've got Soji, who's adamantly trying to release. We'll talk about this. I know it's in a later scene, but we'll talk about this now. Because Narek asks to view the procedure that they're doing, and they're taking an ocular implant off an old Borg drone. And she says, you are free, my friend, in Romulan, which is, the whole thing about Soji is this idea of perfection and imperfection, seeing beauty and that, and releasing these people, wanting to fix these people, the people who have been vulnerable, that have had their that individual mentality wiped, and the Borg is seen. And I think that the way they've kept it, like the Borg cube is actually completely. I think he said something like submatrix has collapsed or something like that. I think it's a terminology. That the Borg are still here. They're still a threat. They're still, this hive mind elsewhere. But we do have, as you say, Hugh, 7 of 9, those type of people. The Borg, the Borg kids who will be a lot older now. But we do have that. But we've still got this threat of the Borg. So the Borg are still there. They're still in the Star Trek universe as such. But you can't treat everyone in the same way, and she's seeing that. She's one of these people who's going to stand up for people, for Borg drones, and wants to help them and wants them to make them imperfect, but actually release them and free them. And I think that that's really a really good thing for Soji to develop her as a character as well. That she has morals, she has a real drive to help these people that are desperately in need, and might be painted with the same brush as a lot of people, and that goes to what you were saying before about how people are reacting to the Borg drones, to being on a Borg cube, but she's perfectly at home in there because she just wants to help.
Yeah, exactly. And I think ironically this is actually something that is probably going to come around to affect her, because we know she's an artificial life form, so the empathy that she's showing towards the Borg drone is hopefully, something that we're going to want to see reflected when how people treat her later in the series. Because when people start finding out she's an artificial life form, I think, just that Dash's sort of like reaction to the fact that she's an artificial, she says, I'm a monster, in the first episode. And so you sort of feel that other people are going to have that reaction to Soji. I think that's where Picard comes in. Just his empathy. He's matured to being a much more emotionally open man over the entire Star Trek franchise, over all the series. And I think in this season he really is very. He seems very warm, and so I think we're going to get a lesson of empathy from Picard.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that in last episode when Daj first approached him. I think that scene is absolutely wonderful. The empathy that just comes out of him is just absolutely amazing. It's something that you would always see with Picard. I think me and Tony discussed this last week, that Picard had a wall built up. He didn't like kids, and that would slowly get eroded down, and that but he would always have empathy for people. But we're seeing a different element where he's lived a life. He's at the end of all good things. He says, I should have done this a long time ago. The death of Data's really affected him. But when his injustice involved, that's what gets his back up, and that's what gets him going. But the empathy that he has throughout is even more magnified now, I feel, that compared to the TNG years. But speaking about Picard, we get to and all good things actually, we get to a scene back at the chateau, where Dr. Ben-Yoon comes, who was on the Stargazer. The Stargazer was mentioned on The Next Generation and was featured in a few episodes, which was Picard's first ship before joining the Enterprise D. There's a few episodes that are based around the Stargazer. So this is obviously his doctor that was on there. Interesting how they don't use Beverly Crusher. So I don't know if there may be a narrative choice for that. I know that the main thing is that from a production point of view, that they didn't want it to be, oh, here's a cameo, here's a cameo, here's a cameo. But I feel that there's a gap there that they could, if ever Gates McFadden wanted to come back as Dr. Beverly Crusher, they could use this as kind of a narrative way of bringing her in, because it may be that, like he says later on, and there's definitely a scene I need to speak about shortly. In fact, I'll do it now. There's a scene later on where Picard says, I don't want to get people involved. I don't want to get, the people who love me, who are invested in me, I don't want to get them into trouble. And Kurt's little subject matter of is LaForge alive has now been resolved, and I'm dead happy. Because he gets name checked. He said, you should go to Worf, you should go to Riker, you should go to LaForge. I was like, yes, LaForge is alive. Because I had real concerns that he died on Utopia Planitia or something's happened to him. Something still could have happened to him, but, he is alive and well. I did message Tony the other day saying, I just hope he's not a brain in a jar. That's
a Futurama or something.
Yeah, exactly. As long as it's not a brain in a jar, I'm happy. But yeah, so he doesn't want to get them involved. So I see why Beverly Crusher on this scene wouldn't probably fit, because they don't want cameos in the show, but there's definitely a way they could write it saying that maybe Picard had a relationship with Crusher and it's fallen apart, or they've become just separated, or whatever. They could use that. But there's some really interesting things that happen within this scene. It kind of goes around the subject of Iromonic syndrome, which we'll talk about in a second. But then it's also kind of bringing in an old character who we've never seen or heard about before, but giving a mirror to Picard to say, these things are affecting him. And it's another aspect of why he needs to go out there more so than ever, because his time on this planet and in this universe is limited, and this really kind of draws out more of I need to do this kind of thing. What did you think to the Doctor scene?
It's a great plot device, because it does mean he has to go out there. It also means that the TV series probably won't go on forever, which I think is probably much to the relief of Patrick Stewart, who I think probably doesn't want to play Picard for another 7 years after this. So he's going to have to eventually become so ill that he can't, go out into space. I think it's a good storyline. I think that degenerative brain disease is something that affects many elderly people. I think that that's something that should be talked about on television. I think that I've seen some horrible comments online about people like sort of rejecting the show because they don't like the fact that the actors have aged, which I think is insane, because like, what you expect them to do, like remain forever young?
Yeah.
But also I think there's not a problem with that, and it's ageist. I think we should see elderly people on television just like we should see young people, just like we should see, people from all different groups. So we should have a diverse representation on television. So the idea that he's elderly, that he is actually quite vulnerable, and they make that clear with Laris and his name, I forgot his name. Zaban, both being concerned, because Laris thinks that he's going to die, out there, because I think he is supposed to be pretty physically vulnerable compared to how he used to be, and the idea also that a man who's older in sort of the last years of his life can actually still have a massive effect on society, can still have a very important role to play. And also, battling a disease that I think is pretty much a lot like dementia. And also a man who's really, known for his mind. He's an intellectual.
Yeah, well, I was just about to say that.
And losing your mind would just be terrifying.
The way that Picard is, and the line that he says that maybe if you're lucky, that going on this mission will kill you first, on whatever he's got himself into, is really important, because I think that Picard is such a man, and I think anyone in the world would be like this, that you don't want to lose the very being, the very essence of who you are. And something like, as you say, dementia and stuff like that needs to be talked about on television. It needs to I've had family members who's had dementia. I've had, also someone with my brother. My brother died of a brain tumor. So I've had someone who's had brain diseases in some ways as well. That you see them not losing who they are, and it's not nice. And I think that you're right with the having the diversity of Star Trek in itself, is meant to be diverse and meant to bring people in, but having this show, 20 odd years, 30 years later compared to what TNG was, I'm absolutely in love with the fact that we're seeing this from this point of view, and I think it's really important to see that. And I think because Picard's also much loved as well, that like he did with Logan, you see a different side to him, but you see something, that it's natural for this sort of thing to happen, that, these things are sent to trials. It's trials and tribulations. It makes great drama at the same point, but it is giving you a point as well. But my main thing for this is I think that Picard, needs to go on his mission. He needs to be himself. The last thing he wants is to lose the very essence of who he is.
I am quite concerned that his doctor is going to lie for him, though. I was like, dude, this doesn't feel very Starfleet to me. I mean, I understand that has to happen in order for the plot to continue, for the story to be furthered. But I was a little bit like, wow, like, do doctors lie now? Do doctors lie in the Federation? Is this something? Like, he could, presumably he's not massively... Well, no, he must be practicing, because he has to certify Picard as being healthy enough to go into space. So he must be practicing. I was like, he's going to lose his license. Like, is this something? And then I thought, well, actually, how many times has Bones lied? Like... Bones is lying all the time, sort of to save Kirk or Spock
if it's for the greater good, I think we're okay.
I think it's also this thing about people's commitment and loyalty to their captains. When you're out in space in this, basically hulk of metal,
cold, doesn't he?
Yeah, you've got to trust your captain. Your captain is like the father of your little family, and that doesn't ever go away, even when you've left Starfleet and you're living on Earth. The captain is still the man or woman that you thinking of Janeway, that you trust implicitly. And I think the amount of times that people have lied for their captains, and the amount of times the captains have tried to go off on their own, to bravely sacrifice themselves to save their crew, which is kind of what Picard's he's trying to not get them involved because he loves his crew. So I was like, this, at the same time I was like, you're going to lie? But then I was like, of course you are, because, he was your captain once, and, and you have basically complete and utter loyalty to him. But at the same time, which we'll go on to talk about, I'm sure we will, Star Trek also shows you that you can totally and utterly rebel against authority figures if you think they're doing something morally wrong. That's a theme that comes up again and again in Star Trek, and it's again shown in this episode.
Yeah, I think that there's been this will lead perfectly into the next scene, really, because me and Tony and I even have said on numerous times about Admiral Dougherty that the people are saying the Romulans are invading Starfleet in some ways, that they've got this clandestine thing happening, and how has this happened, and Starfleet isn't like this. Admiral Dougherty is a character who was trying to force, and this comes into what we're saying with the Romulans, which is the next scene. So basically, Picard goes to Starfleet and comes to see the Admiral Kirsten Clancy, and with Dougherty, he manages to persuade Starfleet to basically go ahead with the assault on Baku, to relocate them, which is a very Picard storyline, where Picard stands up to Dougherty and says, how many lives is it worth living, etc., etc., etc. So this isn't something that hasn't happened before. There's Admiral Ross in Deep Space Nine. There's Cisco when Cisco, what's that episode called? When it's a fake.
What you mean when
Pale Moonlight, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and he's like,
yeah,
I've done something terrible and I've sanctioned something terrible, but I'm just going to forget that I've done it because I would do it again.
Yeah.
You're like, what?
Yeah. So these things have happened. You know, at the end of the day, we are talking about humans. As much as they say they're involved humans, that, you know, it's human nature is tries to, but what the core of Star Trek is that where do you draw the line with it? It needs, you know, as you say, rebel against something that you feel is for the greater good, etc., etc. And yes, Pale Moonlight is probably one of the most, one of the biggest episodes that you could think is probably the closest it's ever gotten to being, okay, that's, yeah. But enough said on that. But yeah, so we do go to Starfleet, and what did you think to this scene? He's obviously had a rapport with Admiral Clancy in the past. There's something that's happened between them, and the sheer gumption of what Picard asking for him to do, I felt was a bit strange. But also, what did you think of the scene and the back and forth between the two of them?
So, first of all, when she came on the screen, I screamed "Bad Admiral," which scared my husband and my cat out of their seats. I was like, "Bad Admiral!" I just also want to emphasise that the Starfleet visitor badge that Picard is forced to wear is a genius touch. That's hilarious. But no,
was that when they came? Was that when he got to reception and saw you? Was
that he spelled out his name, and he's just so long suffering. He's just so disgusted when he puts that visitor badge on his like, chest. It's so funny. I think that if you were to totally play this scene, if you'd actually started out like the episode from the Admiral's point of view, and you saw her get up in the morning, go to work, and all the things that she was dealing with, and then Picard comes in and comes out with this story, and then sort of says what he wants, I think you'd understand why she reacts the way she does, which is like, are you insane? Like, does she actually even say, are you insane? Maybe she doesn't, but her whole demeanour is like, as he's talking, you can see she's looking at her, she's getting steadily more like, what on earth is going on? So I think that her reaction is pretty accurate. I think a lot of people would act that way. They'd be like, what? Picard has finally lost it. He's finally lost it. But we also know everything he's saying is the truth, or what he believes to be the truth. So we're on his side, you know. So her reaction actually seems quite, I would say, outrageous, considering that we know that he thinks what he's saying is the truth. But I think she does start to tip into bias and prejudice. She starts talking about the Romulans being the enemies of the Federation, and I don't think Picard's even talking about any of that. And she refers to his recent news interview, which she's obviously stung by and pissed off by. And it's clear, I think, that at some point she made a decision that he didn't agree with. And they must have argued, and they probably would have been equals then, admirals together. And then, you know, obviously he resigned, and she becomes, I think, she gets quite personal with him, and she becomes, I think, insulting. And I can see that she's sort of shocked by his proposal, by his request, but I think she takes it too far. She's pretty unprofessional, to be honest. Whereas I don't think he's unprofessional to begin with. I think there's a sense of urgency, like, I really need a ship, we need to do this, something serious is happening, I'm letting you know, I want some help. And then she sort of descends into, she goes from like, what on earth, disbelieving, to insulting quite quickly. And I was like, lady.
Just sit back down.
Sit back down. I was also really excited because I was like, in this episode, there are a lot of really mean ladies. And I think there should be more mean women on television. Because there's not that many, to be honest. There's more mean men and nice men. But I was like, yes, the mean ladies are represented. We want them to obviously pay for their crimes, but, you know. Yeah.
I think I'm thinking more of the Picard aspect, and I'll get into her in a second. But the Picard aspect of, you know, it is, he's coming basically saying, look, I haven't been in Starfleet for almost 15 years, but give me a ship, a crew, just a small crew. I'll have a ship, please. I need to go and do this investigation. And as you say, because of where he's been the last 15 years, that he's been secluded, he's not taking interviews, he's not doing anything like that. He comes out and says, it wasn't Starfleet. You know, I hate, you know, this, I hate what they've become, etc., etc. Then goes, I'll tell you what, the following day, or wherever, how many days it's been, can I have a ship, please? But she does, and this is the only thing that I would say. I think I'm not adverse to, we know we dropped the F-bomb in Discovery first. I'm not bothered about it. It doesn't really concern me. Like, as I said, the way Laris Dunn felt was really natural. You know, the way it's cheer. If she just say fucking or fecking, doesn't really matter either way. But this one, sheer fucking hubris. And I was like, was there any real need for that? It just felt a bit forced. And that's not necessarily the line, it was the way it was delivered for me. But moving on from that, this is a real crux of what's happened around Utopia Planitia. That this is mentioned, and a couple of people I've seen online have missed this, that she says that even before that event, there was 14 species that were basically saying we need to cut the Romulans out and just don't help them. And it was only because, and it mentions in the interview that Starfleet had decided that they will help them because of what Picard was saying. But after it happened, that these 14 species are putting pressure on the Federation to not help them, you know, and the fact that there's no ships available, didn't have enough ships, didn't do this, didn't do that. You've got 14 of however million or thousands of people in Starfleet, in the Federation are. What did you make to that? Because that's probably a small number, but it may well be a powerful number, and you know, the Federation is in danger of collapse here. So that's the reasoning behind it. But what did you make to that? Well,
also, some of those species objecting to, like, helping the Romulans might be living very close to the Romulan space. You know, I mean,
or where there would be refugee and things.
Yeah, some of them might be, you know, if we think about the Maquis, who were living, you know, who eventually ended up living in Cardassian territory through no fault of their own. I mean, do you know what I mean? Like, some of these small alliances, or these small species, small homeworlds, or wherever, or colonies or whatever. I mean, it's quite possible that some of these people have actually felt the full force of Romulan aggression, and so they are objecting to it. It might not all just be something like xenophobia, or not wanting to use, or it could be like a drain on resources. Maybe this one species only have a certain amount of ships and they really need them for transporting grain or whatever. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm making all of this up, but that's why we have fan fiction. But you know what I mean? Like, it might be that, you know, that some of these species have a legitimate reason for not wanting to help the Romulans, whereas Picard really just sees it as prejudice and xenophobia. He's really seeing it very black and white in this particular situation, whereas she's a politician, right? And he's I guess in the past he was the diplomat, but now he's the crusader, you know, I guess. And she's a politician, so she has to say to herself, you know, how are we going to keep the Federation together? And, like, let's be honest, the bigger picture is keeping the Federation together and preserving sentient life in the galaxy, right? Because if the Federation falls apart, we're all in trouble. I say we, like I'm actually living it, but you know what I mean? Like, you know, like
we're all living it. We're
all kind of living it now, really, aren't we? Let's be honest. But, like, you know, like, I mean, so everybody's in trouble. You know, it's not just the Romulans or the humans. It's the Klingons and the Vulcans and everybody else you can possibly imagine. So actually, that also occurred to me as well when they were celebrating First Contact Day. I was wondering if there was anybody on Earth that was a dissenting voice, because, like, wonderful things came with First Contact, right? Wonderful, wonderful things. But also, a lot of terrible things came with First Contact too, which is that the humans were involved in many, many wars, intergalactic wars since First Contact, and many, many people have died in awful ways. So, I mean, we don't really ever see the people on Earth who want to stay on Earth and don't want to go into space. There's this idea that everybody wants a life in space, but actually, you know, I mean, we are seeing it more, I suppose, with people working in the vineyard and stuff. But, like, there are people that probably just want to stay on Earth.
I mean, if you think about the World War III, they were dealing with the ramifications of World War III before First Contact. It had been that had died down quite a bit, and then First Contact happened. You can imagine. I'm not too au fait with my dates here, but basically, First Contact happens, and we get relatively peace. We get Enterprise with the dawn of the Federation. You know, the fact that the Vulcans have come, and you know, Captain Archer takes over from Star Trek Enterprise, and eventually we do get to the original series and then to Next Generation. But there is, which is what you've mentioned, there has been these elements. It's really important for this part as well that we have had Locutus, who was Picard, who was a Borg drone, in a way, but was also an equal to the Borg Queen, which we didn't know at the time. But Locutus was a conduit to help with the assimilation of the Federation and Earth especially. So we've got that event happening. We've got the Dominion War, which involved the Breen attack on San Francisco. And that was only 2375. And they had managed to get most of the repair done from that war in 2376. Star Trek Nemesis is 2379. And then we've got the Utopia Planitia in 2385. So they have gone through a lot of stuff over the years around the Next Generation period, right up to the Deep Space Nine period and beyond, really. And then obviously we're catching up with that. And
wasn't there attack? Wasn't half of Florida destroyed by somebody in Enterprise?
That was the Zindi, yeah. So that was maybe 80 or so years before that, yeah.
Maybe that would have happened without First Contact, but.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I sort of feel like it's that Pandora's box. Basically, we're talking about globalization, except we're talking about it in science fiction, right? It's that Pandora's box. Once you start becoming aware of the world around you and you start interacting with the world around you and you go out there, you can't take that knowledge back. Once you have that knowledge and then you're in that situation, you can't then, take it back and erase your connection to everything else. And so, then you're sort of start getting involved in other people's lives, and which means you have to take action. You can't be sort of isolated. I mean, humanity, when they had a World War III, so they probably wouldn't be any better, but I'm sure there are some people on Earth in Star Trek wondering if humanity would have been better if they'd never met the Vulcans. But Picard also says, in First Contact, that that's not the case. That they eradicated poverty, they got rid of money, they made scientific discoveries.
And I think, I think that, everyone would expect, after the Cold War had finished, that, things were getting back to normal. Then September 11th happened and, the world was changed again. And, these things not necessarily go around in cycles, but that, big events changed what we feel about the world as such. And we're going through isolationism at the moment. We're no longer members of the EU, which I won't go in. We're not going to talk about that because that's just happened yesterday.
Yeah, we don't know what it's going to be like. We don't know
exactly.
the future. Yeah, it doesn't.
But so I think that obviously these big things do change your opinions and thoughts on it as well. But I think it's a really good point that you make that there will be dissenting voices on Earth. There will be, all this aspect. And I'm hoping that they will touch on some of this as well, because we are looking at, from a civilization point of view. I've got a feeling that we'll probably spend more time in ships and going around the universe now, the galaxy more than anything else. Really.
Well, it is Star Trek, I guess. It is about
exactly.
Yeah.
It has to.
Track and field stuff.
Yeah, I've seen people. I've seen people love these first two episodes, but I've also seen people saying, "When do we get into space?" So, so it's a fine balance. But let's move on anyway. Let's move to the next scene. The next scene is important, but there's not too much going on in it. It's when we have Dr. Jurati. She comes to Picard's chateau, and she sits down. We see that she's holding, I think was she holding the book? She was holding the Isaac Asimov book, Complete Robot, which is the short stories of I think it's 30 or 40 short stories about things like iRobot is in there, I think. So that was a nice little touch. And then Picard says, "I never really got science fiction," which I thought was a nice little funny moment. But we also get to find out that Daj we think that Daj only came into being 3 years ago, which it's something I'm not too surprised about, because I was thinking, she's a fully formed flesh and blood android. She can't have been a baby unless, I joked with, on Twitter saying, are they using Borg maturation chambers? But obviously that's not going to happen. But, you get this scene with Dr. Jurati saying, that they only came into being 3 years ago. There was something that I noted, and this is me either overthinking things or overlooking something, or it as watching it actually deliberate, because Picard offers her some tea. He has a selection, but the way that Jurati acts, and then there's an edit slightly later where it looks like it's only Earl Grey on the plate, and I think that may be a call to the syndrome. that might have been playing in, and I don't know, I might be just totally overseeing it, but that's something that I saw. But what did you think to the reveal about Daj, really?
I personally don't think that you could have like a fully functional, sentient, artificial life form who's so talented running around for like 25 years without somebody knowing or somebody noticing. So it makes sense that she was born like 3 years before. I think the interesting thing about this is the way that and this is reflected later on, which I'm sure we'll talk about in the Romulan scientist in the Borg cube. But Professor, or was it Dr. Gujarati, the way she refers, and she did in the last episode, and in this episode she slightly changed her tone, but the way she refers to Daj, it's very interesting. It's like how a scientist refers to their subject, and this is something that obviously was in The Measure of a Man as well. Maddox sort of seeing data as a scientific object of study is, you see this again and again in popular culture. As scientists, we care about science, like we really do respect science. Well, hopefully most of us do, and, respect scientific exploration, especially if you're a fan of Star Trek, because that's what a lot of it's about. But there is also this theme of scientists sort of losing perspective about their subjects, sort of seeing them as less than human or seeing them as less than sentient. And this idea of self-determination, they sort of, after a while, sort of see these subjects as something that they don't have self-determination. And Dr. Gujarati, she does say that in the first episode. She calls it an it, or she calls Dash an it, or something like that. I can't remember now exactly. And Picard corrects her. And in this episode, she seems to have changed her tone slightly. She's melancholy because, she never got to meet her. And she seems to be talking about her more like she's a person, which is reflected later in this episode where the Borg drone is being worked on. And, the Romulan scientist sees the Borg drone as just a thing. And obviously this isn't common amongst all scientists, but it's that thing of how in the pursuit of knowledge, a scientist can lose perspective.
Lose sight.
Yeah, lose perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about that way as well. I mean, because that scene, it's functional. There's not too much on it. I think it's purely designed to say, look, Jurati's still here. And, I mean, Alison Pill's a great actress, so I loved her in The Newsroom. So, but yeah, I think she's
I hope
fantastic.
they really use her here. I hope they use her a lot, because she's really good.
I would hope so. There has been rumours, or not rumours, there has been ideas that there's been a few things that she may herself be an android or a synthetic, or she may even be Maddox, which is a bit out there. I would be very surprised if that was the
Maddox
case,
has had a sex change.
Yeah, or she's been implanted with Maddox's consciousness or something like that.
Her being an android would be a neat twist.
Yeah,
I wonder how she'd react to that, because she studies them all her life, right? And she really wants to make androids and everything. But just how does she emotionally feel about them? If she discovered she herself was one, would she be horrified? How would she deal with that?
It's the two sets of Daj and Sojis, and the X one is Jurati. That's for going back to the Queen Heart potentially, because Maddox has like championed her, so so I can see why people are thinking that, and as you say, it would be interesting if they do that as a reveal, so that would be really good. But I think purely on this episode, I think it's just a way of saying Jurati's still here. She's important to the plot, and we'll catch up with her in later episodes. We were talking about the Borg, going back to the Borg cube. Now, the new girl who I didn't quite catch her name. I haven't got this on. I haven't managed to do my research on this because it's difficult when episodes come out and you've got literally less than 24 hours to prepare, and you've got loads of things on.
She's a trill, isn't she? Though
she's a trill. Yeah, that was
trill scientist.
We'll call her the trill scientist. Yeah, but that was quite interesting because the trills. The first trill that I think we meet was Jadzia Dax. I'm not sure that there was ever an alien before her.
Oh no, there was one in Next Generation. Do you remember?
Was there?
Yeah, it was a diplomat or an ambassador.
Oh yes,
Beverly fell in love with. But he didn't have spots.
Yes.
He looked different.
Yes. That's right. Yeah, you're right. But Trill Polytech. But Trills are naturally known for being scientists, I think. So I think that's nice, interesting setup. But what I picked up, I don't know if you picked up on this, because this is something I've not really had chance to have a proper look, but her paperwork was delayed and then all of a sudden it got reversed. And I thought, is that something that's going to come back? Is she important? But also the works on the Borg drones. What did you make to that scene? What did you make to what they're doing with the reclamation? What did that whole aspect? I know we talked a little bit about it before, but just the general concept, the idea that they are working to free these Borgs of their components, and then the Romulans are obviously harnessing the Borg technology for themselves, really, which again is interesting with the fact that they're kind of step back from that kind of AI technology, really. What did you make to that?
Well, Narek has something in his ear, and I wondered, on one of his ears, and I wondered if that was Borg technology. I feel that several complicating factors, which is one, who are these people working for? Are they working for the Romulan Empire? Is this some sort of international collective of scientists and the Romulans are in charge? I mean, the Romulans are all the ones holding the guns, like the security team. So, and why would, after everything that's just happened, and all after the last few years of history, I'm just curious, if Romulans are still enemies of the Federation, of Starfleet, why would a Trill scientist go work with them? Unless they're not anymore. But also, so it does sound like her paperwork is being controlled by the Romulans and that she's been hired by the Romulans. And how do the Romulans justify to Starfleet and the Federation that they are investigating and working on a Borg cube? And then also, if it's not known and no one knows, how is it that all these people working for them don't realise this is a covert operation? So I was like, what is going on? But then also, when they were actually working on the Borg drone, I thought, how ethical is this? It's nice to think of the idea that Soji is trying to set these people free, but we forget. But when 7 of 9 was set free in Voyager, it was forcible. And she did not want it. She wanted to go back to the collective. And she spent the rest of the series trying to understand individuality and trying to operate in this completely alien environment. So I'm not saying that we should leave the Borg as the Borg. Obviously these people should, well, I wouldn't say obvious, but I guess it's a question, isn't it? Should they be set free? But also, how much consent do these dormant Borg have over what's being done to them? Whether it's stuff being removed from their bodies, or whether it's being removed from the Borg or being made human or whatever, I don't know, Bajoran or Vulcan again. The whole thing just seems dodgy. Really dodgy.
Yeah, it's almost like...
Why are there so many armed guards? That's what I want to know. If there's no threat... Well, I guess there is a threat from the drones, but also, who are they for? Are they for the drones? Or are they for the workers?
Yeah. I think if you take a step back from Star Trek... Because Star Trek has always been viewed from a Federation point of view. A lot of things, you automatically think is it something to do with the Federation? Is it something to do with the Romulans? Where it's like what we're saying with, it's a lot more, what's the word? It's a lot more difficult than that, because these seem to be scientists that are getting involved. So is it like a cabal of the Romulans? Is it in Romulan space? Is it just outside of Romulan space? Is it maybe near the Hobart system or wherever, which me and Tony talked about last week on the Countdown comic? Is this a Borg cube where it was involved in the attack on Wolf 359? It's been dormant for 40, 50 years, and it's an open secret that scientists are really interested in harvesting this, and it doesn't fall in any kind of territory. It is an open question, and I think I'm not sure that we'll get an answer to it, but you never know. But it is a really strange one. As you say, you mentioned Trill are there. You've got all these different elements, but then the Romulans seem to be the ones that are in charge of the whole thing. Now, whether or not that's the Romulan Empire or whatever the Romulans are now, whether it's a Tal Shiar, I can't see it being the Jatfash, full stop. So it potentially could be the Tal Shiar, but again, why would Soji go there? So that's going to be really interesting as we move into future episodes.
It reminded me of Genesis, in The Wrath of Khan. It reminded me of something like such a huge project with such potential for disaster that's basically out there in the middle of space, and somehow everyone has managed to miss it. Yeah. They've managed to completely bypass it. They've probably flown around it and just went, oh, well, whatever, not realised, I'm thinking of how busy space must be now with trade routes and transit vehicles and delivery of this and delivery of that and Federation starships flying about, interacting with each other. And I'm no one has accidentally stumbled across this Borg cube full of scientists. So I think somewhere along the line, it must be somehow sanctioned somehow. But
yeah.
But I'm then why would they get, if they don't like the Romulans, why would they put the Romulans in charge of it? Yeah. And also, I'm sorry, I don't understand how anybody would willingly, voluntarily go to a Borg cube and have quarters there. How could you sleep? How is anyone sleeping? It's a nightmare waiting to happen.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so that's something for future. It's going to be really interesting how they work that story, and we're only in the second episode. We've got another 8 to go, so it's going to be really interesting. We're getting towards the end of the story now in this final act, and we come across Commander O talking to Admiral Clancy, and then the introduction of Lieutenant Rizzo, who we find out is Narek's Narek's sister. Now, I really liked. I've seen a few comments saying she's Vulcan, she's Romulan, she's Vulcan, she's Romulan, she's Vulcan, she's Romulan with Commander O. I think there's some sort of emblem on the front. I'm not too au fait with my folklore with regards to Romulans, Vulcans, but it appears that she seems to be posing as a Vulcan because she's. Does she? I'm really kind of mixed on this, because is Commander O posing as a Vulcan, or is she a Vulcan that's been recruited in to this plot? That's my first question. Second one would be, when she's watching the video replay and says, does that look like phaser fire? I quite like the subversion of that you think that Commander O is looking at that from a point of view of, there's maybe something to this, and it very quickly changes that around. And then there's a lot of lens flare in this scene, so much so that you're pretty much blinded for the rest of the scene. But then we get this kind of clandestine element to it. What did you make to all of that? The fact that we've got this Commander O's who's in obviously high rank in power, and but also it softens Admiral Clancy as well. What did you make to that?
Well, first of all, I loved her name. So in my mind, she's a Vulcan that has some human heritage. I think O is a human name, not a Vulcan name. And also, I mean, this is the same with Dr. Gujarati. I was like, this is great that they're giving these different diverse names to different characters to sort of imply that the sort of Earth and the Federation stuff is just such a melting pot. People are all interacting with each other and living together and everything. So they all have these different types of heritage in their backgrounds, which I really loved. But I felt like she might be part human and part Vulcan, because you wouldn't necessarily know, because the Vulcan genes are supposed to be dominant, right? Because look at Spock, But I would love it if she was at least a little bit Vulcan, because the idea of Vulcan, because, you could use logic to justify almost anything. So, a Vulcan being it's not logical based on previous evidence of what synths can do to allow synths to, I don't know, exist or whatever. I could see how logic could take her down a dark path. Yeah. And so then that would mean that she'd align herself with Romulans. I've always liked the idea of Vulcans and Romulans working together. Yeah. I actually never liked the idea that they were... I like the idea that they were enemies, but I also like the idea that they were working together too. I never liked the idea that they became so separate that the Romulans started to physically look different than Vulcans. I think I loved that TOS episode, Balance of Terror, I think it is?
Balance of Terror,
yeah. Where everybody in the bridge sees the sees the Romulan on the view screen, and then all turn and look at Spock because they look very similar. I love that idea. And so I'm totally up for somebody who's at least partially Vulcan to be interacting with, and up to like no good covert cahoots with Romulans. I think that would work fine. Again, it's another evil woman who's probably gonna have to pay the price at some point for her corruption. But she's not. And also, if she was Romulan, I don't know why she would maintain this facade in front of one of her operatives. Which makes me think she's Vulcan.
Yeah.
Because she's like so insulting in only a way a Vulcan can be.
I assumed she was a Vulcan when I watched it because of the way she was acting, and it's just stuff that you see. It's always that thing, isn't it? When you see an episode, and it's like I really enjoyed it, made my notes. Then last night, just before I went to bed, I started watching or looking online and finding bits and bobs, and that story was posed. That question was posed, and I was like, oh, right, okay. I didn't think of it that way, and then it's kind of muddled me up. But talking that through now, I would think she's a Vulcan that's been coerced, and I do like that logical aspect because, you know, the fact that she's also saying we needed to kidnap her, we needed to find out what she is, how she is, why she is, I think is really important as well because, you know, you've ruined the only chance we get. We need to get this alone. We need to find out why this being exists. And it's the fear thing as well, isn't it? The whole aspect of, you know, the fearful of the unknown, really.
Yeah, and I think actually that Vulcans themselves could be just as prejudiced or as biased or isolationist as any other society or any other alien group. I guess each group is prejudiced in its own little way, maybe its own specific type of way. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing more. I do wish we could see a few more Starfleet officers. Like, I do wish that we didn't just see the receptionist and two bad leaders, corrupt leaders, and an operative. I wish maybe we could see some, maybe some good admirals struggling with the bad admirals and maybe making Starfleet a bit more complex. But I suspect this is Picard's vehicle, and we're going to follow him more, which is totally fine.
Yeah, so Lieutenant Rizzo is obviously an operative. She's changed her ears. Now, I think we'll just jump ahead before we'll go into Raffi shortly. But Lieutenant Rizzo is a character that's been brought in that she's got a brother who we find out is Narek. What did you make of the conversation between Narek and Rizzo during the hologram sequence where we're finding out that basically that Commander O has said, yeah, you will pay the price if you don't do this right. And she says, I trust him with my life, etc., etc. And that she's got everything to lose now, and she wants to make sure that the brother's there. And as we mentioned at the top of the episode, that there's this element of, is Narek going to go, which way is he going to go? Is it between family and the Cabal, or is he going to go on the Soji route? So that's opening that up to a lot of consequences, really, isn't it? So what did you make of that?
Well, when I first revealed they were brothers and sisters, I was like, what? My God, what a reveal! Which I think was more shock than almost probably anybody else watching this, because I was like, wow, that's so cool. But also, she does say she trusts him with her life, but then she also treats him really badly, and kind of implies that she's like, I'm gonna cut you loose if you become a liability to save myself. She does also reference last time. I think they're referencing the brother who they've lost. And I was like, is this what all Romulan families are like? Because there doesn't seem to be much love or intimacy between these two, which I thought was interesting. I was like, wow, a dysfunctional Romulan family. I didn't see that coming. I thought he was just going to be like a man that she'd hired. I knew immediately when she started talking about her operative or whatever, I knew it was definitely Narek, but I didn't think they were going to be related to each other. I like how he sort of insults her for her human appearance. I think that's really clever. And I think that also shows a certain level of, xenophobia from the Romulan side. There is this tension between humans and Romulans, definitely, running throughout the entire series. It also raises the stakes, because I actually think Narek's going to fall in love with Soji. I think he's going to fall in love with her, or at least he's going to start having a crisis of conscience. He's going to start realizing that she's a lot more human-like, or at least sentient, than he maybe thought before. She's a person, and he's going to start caring about her. but the stakes are also high because how can you turn your back on family? You know, especially if family is part of, if it's an honor thing too, which I assume there must be a family honor aspect of Romulan society because there is in almost every other alien species in Star Trek. So, you know, family is really important. So, will he turn his back on his family? And, you know, are there other members? Like, do they have like a crazy matriarch? I mean, or do they have a father who, I mean, because they mentioned that with Laris, and that she was recruited by her mother-in-law. I mean,
yeah, it took me a couple of watches of that because he keeps going, mother, father. I'm like, what?
Yeah, so his father was a drunk, and his mother was like a senior spy, a bit like Garak and his father.
Oh yeah,
you know,
yeah.
It's all a bit incestuous and dodgy.
Oh yeah, so I think personally, as I mentioned before, that's going to be a really interesting dynamic, and I think that's going to be something to look out for sure. We meet Raffi for the first time. It's played by Michelle Hurd. Picard, earlier in the scene when we find out that LaForge is alive, yay! He says, you know, why not go to Worf? Why not go to LaForge? Why not go to Riker? And he says, Picard says, I don't want to get them involved because they will. Of course they will get involved. I've thought about this, but they will put their lives on the line and I don't want to go through that again. That to me says, now bearing in mind, you know, Nemesis and First Contact and Insurrection and everything that he's done before, but that suggests to me that something may have even happened slightly before, between Nemesis and as well, you know, but I may be just like fan fiction in there, but but things like Nemesis where it puts him through a lot and Data dies, that he's still struggling with that. But then Zaban says, well, you know, maybe you go for someone you hate. And we do see the earlier thing. And something that really took me out of the story was when Picard took the communicating badge and went and activated it to speak to Raffi and says, don't hang up. Now, would you still hang up in the 2400s on a communication badge?
Yeah, if you don't like somebody. If you don't want to talk to them, you just press your badge again, right? And you cut off the signal.
Yeah, but it's the terminology. I was like, well, okay.
Oh, as in like, don't cut the call or don't terminate. Yeah. Don't terminate. I guess don't terminate is, well, okay, here's an example of something we still do that no one ever does anymore. When you ask for the bill or the check in a restaurant, how do you do it?
Can I have the bill, please?
Yeah, but don't you do a hand gesture?
Oh, right. Okay.
Like a check.
Yeah.
Or like you do it as if you're going to you sign in the air. I mean, people do it. I do it. My entire family does it. All my friends do it, but also I've seen people in restaurants do it. But no one signs a check anymore. No one signs a bill. But you don't go and like do like a trip and pin or like a pin number. You don't like pretend to press buttons in the air, do you? Like you would on a card machine. So I think it's just slang. It's weird. I agree with you. Like, you know, I saw somebody saying, you know, that in the Voyage Home, that none of the Enterprise crew know what swearing is. And now they suddenly do. It is weird, but I mean, would hang up exist? You know, thousands of years from now? I don't know. I agree with you. It's strange, but I think that people do hold on to these weird slang analogies, or slang terms or whatever, even when the technology for that kind of thing is completely obsolete.
Yeah, no, I get that. But also as well, we don't see any conversation. It says, "Don't hang up. I need a ship." And what I do like, actually,
to be honest.
Nope.
Also, how do you even know that she's there? Like, what if does it go to answer machine if she's not? Like, maybe she just doesn't. Maybe she's in the shower, or she's, I don't know, out with friends having cocktails. Maybe she's just not answering your call because she's not seen it. So, I mean, how do you know it connects? Or, you know, I just, comm badges are odd. I think connecting via comm badge is strange.
Yeah, I think. Maybe it's fan servicing a little bit because, you know, it's iconic that, you know, he does tap his badge, he puts it back on again. And why would you need to put it back on? Because I've seen them use comm badges when they're not on the left hand breast. I've seen that.
Also, how do you ever turn off a comm badge? Because what if you like take a nap and you roll over onto your comm badge and you broadcast your snoring to everybody? Like, I just honestly, the comm badge thing has always bothered me. I much prefer communicators where they flip them open. Like,
right, yeah.
I mean that's my own personal like bugbear. But like, I've always been like, what if you hug someone? You know, someone comes off the transport and you hug them and you accidentally like, you know, spark your comm badge. Do you broadcast your conversation to the entire ship? I just never know how it works.
It could be biometrics. It could be fingerprint when they touch it.
Oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. I guess you need them as well for what's it called, the translator.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. Is that how that? I used to have the Michael Okuda. I used to have Michael Okuda books when I was really young, especially the Design the Enterprise and stuff. But yeah, that's getting a bit techie. We'll save that for the tech episode that we will eventually do. But anyway, so yeah, so no matter what, but what I do like about that scene, and you mentioned this earlier about how much you love the theme music, that when we get to Starfleet, I mentioned this last week, that the Next Generation theme comes on. When we get to this badge scene, the Next Generation theme comes on. When we get to the scene with Raffi, which is the next scene that I'm going to talk about, we have like a piccolo flute coming through, which is kind of the kind of theme from The Inner Light, which is an episode of TNG where Picard lives a full life time in 5 minutes of a different species, and he learns about their culture. But what did you think to the music in this episode and Raffi's introduction? What do you make of her? And bear in mind, you haven't seen the comics, but there's a couple of bits in the comics that broaden it out, although not too much. We were a bit disappointed with how much she's in it, but she is in the episode, in the comics. What did you make to that?
So I completely missed that piece of music that you're talking about, which makes me, I'm going to go back and rewatch it now so I can hear it. I do love the music to this show. I love the theme tune especially. I feel like it's nostalgic and sort of hopeful, but also kind of melancholy, a bit like Picard himself. And I think the opening credits are a fantastic mix of like biology and technology. So I really love the music. I think it's really nice. I love that little like Star Trek, little like TNG theme at the very end of the credits, which is really cool. So with Raffi, I'm not really sure what to think about Raffi. I'm hoping they don't make it that they have some sort of romantic past, just because I feel like that would be introducing another story element that maybe isn't necessarily needed and would just be a bit of a distraction. I feel like, I wonder if they're going to do that. I wonder if he's had some sort of romantic past with her. I think obviously there's some other story there, like she's somehow was involved. She was in Starfleet, presumably, I guess. So she's somehow involved. With the Romulans.
Without spoiling the comic too much, she's basically Picard's number one.
Oh, okay.
So that's kind of where she comes in, but she's very she's not pally because and this is the thing to Picard, that he's quite formal, but she refers to him quite in a friendly way. So I personally, looking at the comics, I don't think there would have been an emotional relationship way, but I think that there's kind respect there, kind of what Ro Laren could have been. It's that kind of, that kind of relationship, the way that I play it. But the way that the comic ends, we don't know what's happening. You don't really kind of get an idea of why they don't like each other anymore. So that's all to be discussed. But yeah, you definitely get that feeling that they have mutual respect and, a bit like, I know I'm going to come off a little bit here because most people won't watch this, but a bit like Lara Means and Frank Black in Millennium.
Okay. And
that kind of feel. Yeah.
So they're professional, but they're not. It's not family like it was with the original TNG crew. So I guess there's not the same emotional connection there. I mean, obviously, if he's going to willingly to approach her about this very dangerous mission, which he's trying to save the other TNG crew from, there is a problem there, though. Actually, there is a real problem because it's hard to imagine Picard making an emotional judgment like that. Like, some people's lives are worth more than others. I just don't think he would do that. And also, there is that problem of like, well, if it's not safe enough for the TNG crew, then it's not safe enough for Raffi. And if it is safe enough for Raffi, then it probably would be safe enough for the TNG crew, And also, the TNG crew would care about Data having, like, I know they're not biological offspring, but Data, they're, they would care about Data's family or Data's children. You know, they would care about that. So, and Raffi really probably won't. But I know why they have to do it, because they can't have the entire TNG cast come back. It's not Next Generation. It's something different. They need other actors. And new actors should be given the chance to be in Star Trek. Why not? You know, and that's also part of it, is that Star Trek makes room for, you know, everybody to have a go, right? Or most people, in most cases. So, I can see why. But I will reserve judgment. We haven't really seen much of Raffi yet.
No. I would argue to a point that I think that Picard doesn't want to get them involved because he doesn't want them to put their lives on the line for him. That he's not necessarily got a death wish, but he has just found out that he's got a potential issue which is starting to affect him, having vivid dreams. Ironic syndrome, as I say, comes up in All Good Things at the end, where he's jumping through time, and that he finds out that that he might have this syndrome. He has it in a future life, and this is it kind of coming to bear now. But there's the element of, I don't want to get them involved, because if I'm going to do this is my quest. If Raffi does hate me because of whatever I've done, that she might not necessarily come and save me, and I don't want that on my conscience that someone saved me.
So she's not going to risk her life into protecting him. But I think we all know that she will, because this is Star Trek, and we want her to as well. We don't want her to let him die. But also, maybe she owes him for something. You know, maybe he knows that she feels a sense of obligation. But then I guess so the TNG crew. Yeah, actually, what you're saying kind of makes more sense, I think.
Yeah. And finally, I think what was a nice touch that Picard knows how to get under his skin a little bit by saying Romulan secret operatives on Earth, and then he kind of like is dangling the 2386 wine as well. And she went, "Is that the 86?" And he's like, "Yep."
Isn't that like a few years after the Mars shipyard?
It's a year. So I'm thinking it's the first batch of wines that he produced after he retired, because 2385 was the invasion on Mars. He has the thing with the Federation saying, we're not going to rescue the Romulans. He's resigned out of protest, has gone back to his vineyard, and this is his first season of batch from that wine. That's what I think it is.
And that would mean something to her, probably. So yeah.
So that ends the episode. So final thoughts before we go into the mailbag. What did you make? Now we've gone through it all. What did you make of the episode, and what are you looking forward to moving forward?
So I thought the episode was really good, as we've talked about, and I'm loving the way it's filmed. I'm loving the way everything's sort of. I'm loving the music. I'm loving the stylistic choices. The acting's really good, and storylines are compelling. I think this is some of the best Star Trek I've seen in a long time. Totally agree with that. Yeah, not a criticism to Discovery. There was aspects of Discovery I really loved, but it's a different show, and I think we tend to, as fans, compare shows to each other, which is not really actually necessarily a good thing to do. It's not very helpful. So what am I looking for? I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of ship they end up on. And I'm looking forward to finding out more about Soji's backstory, and hopefully seeing maybe more of the twins, if there's more twins. I'm hoping that the Queen of Hearts means something. And yeah, I just want to find out more about the Romulans as well. And also I'm looking forward to seeing 7 or 9. She's coming up soon. Yeah. She's coming up soon, hopefully.
She's coming up soon. I actually thought we might get to see at least one character we're wait for that we've seen in the show. I know we probably won't get to see some of the TNG crew till later on. I think that's going to be further down the line. But I thought they would see 7 of 9 or potentially Hugh by now, and we may well get both of them next week. We may get one. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, so that's that breaks down the episode, and it's been a mammoth again. then these episodes need to like stop putting so much into them.
Yeah.
Because we just need one where it's just like pure action for an hour, and then just say, yeah, that was good. Action scenes were great. Thanks. I'm going for a drink. But thank you for coming on, Clara. We do have to go through the mailbag, so that's what we shall go and do right now. So let's dive into what the people online have been saying in our Twitter feed and our Make It So Star Trek podcast fan group on Facebook. So let's go do that now. Right, okay, so Laura E4L Earp says, very disappointed in Starfleet. What happened to them to allow being infiltrated like it appears? From a storytelling standpoint, it's riveting, and I get the allegory, but I feel it's bad for folks who have been making their new Starfleet uniforms for cosplay. Starfleet costumes for cosplay. I did see there was a design that they've got loads of little deltas embroidered into the tops of the yellow bits, and I've seen quite a few people saying that's going to cost a fortune to do that. So that was interesting. What happened to them being allowed to to be infiltrated like it appears? So we discussed that with the Vulcan thing. Yeah, the infiltration thing. It's not the first time that's happened. We've had the shapeshifters in Deep Space Nine come on, haven't we? So we've had that infiltration, which was quite an interesting aspect to it. What did you? Yeah. So what do you think to that? What do you think to the infiltration of Starfleet?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem totally out of. Totally left field to me, totally out of place. I think Starfleet was infiltrated in season 1 of Next Generation as well by
Conspiracy. Yeah, that
hilarious episode where they sort of dissolve. It's horror as well.
That gruesome. Yeah,
it's gruesome,
it's
but
gruesome.
Also
Funny.
It's also funny. I don't think it was funny when I first watched it as a kid, but now watching it, I'm like, oh my god, this is hilarious. I don't know. I mean. The thing is Star Trek is a utopia, right? It's a utopian view. But utopias are hard won, aren't they? So you have to have some sort of trial for the characters to struggle through in order to build a better world. And if you don't maintain that better world, it will descend into chaos. I mean, it's that like idea that people, in the workplace are like, oh, I don't need to join a union because, or I have maternity leave and I have good pay. And I'm thinking, well, you have it now, but all those rights can always be taken away from you if you don't continue to monitor them and be vigilant and fight for them. And so this isn't like a union speech, but just that, like, I sort of feel like that a little bit with the Federation, that they have to still continue to be called to account. And the same with Starfleet as well. They have to continue to be, monitored and scrutinized in order to make sure that they don't descend into corruption or chaos. And I would say that's the same with any good institution or union or organization. So the fact that they've been infiltrated just means that, maybe everybody got a bit complacent and started looking away. And also maybe they were looking at the tragedy of the shipyards on Mars. Maybe they were distracted by that, some terrible event, and everybody starts looking inward instead of paying attention to what's going on around them.
Yeah, taking the eye off the ball. I think I would agree with that, definitely. Brett Williams says, he said this on Facebook, man, I love this so far. Glad to see Starfleet itself isn't the bad guy. If not a little lazy getting all infiltrated like that, so we just talked about that. I felt visceral anger when the Admiral dared to get shitty with my captain. There's a lot of people like that. It's my captain. Loved Laris's temper tantrum, which we've discussed. Really wants the band to go with him, but no, he doesn't. Raffi's reaction to Picard showing up makes me really need to know what went wrong at the end. I was hoping Countdown 3 would give us that. Killing me to see what the Romulans are doing with the Borg Nameless is a name. Really wish they would have launched all 3 prologue-like episodes together at once. And Raffi, don't hang up on me, saying with the Doctor we'd never met really authentic, great performances there. I think that what he's saying there is like the Raffi, don't hang up on me, which is what I've discussed, just feels a bit off. And the scene with the Doctor that we never really met felt authentic. So that's nice to know that, a character who we've never heard of, never met before. That it goes back to before the Next Generation Star Trek Enterprise D game. But it does feel authentic that they seem to have a nice rapport. And he's a character actor that's been in quite a lot of TV shows, I think, as well. So that was good.
Yeah, he seemed familiar to me, but I couldn't figure out where I'd seen him before.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure where I've seen him, but I've seen online somewhere that he's one of these people like Alan Dale, because Alan Dale was he was the Romulan who was in Star Trek Nemesis that died, but he's also been in Lost, and he was the Toothpick Man in X-Files. The kind of bad guy towards the end. He was in absolutely everything, wasn't he? And Terry O'Quinn was a bit like that as well. He was in loads of stuff. So yeah, I think he's one of those people that just appears in loads of different TV shows. Adam Silver, he's been someone that we know quite well.
Yeah.
He's enjoying a lot of it so far. Data having a daughter is a great way to bring back Picard into the fold. The Romulan hatred for synths is an interesting angle. I have no idea where it's going, so it makes it exciting. Thank you, Adam, for that. It's glad to see you in the group and commenting. Fantastic, thank you. Jennifer Future, if I've said that right, I apologise if I've destroyed your name there. I apologise. Generally a good episode, even if it felt a little exposition heavy. What did the Federation honestly expect when they've built a slave race of robots? When has that ever gone well? Which is true. Though I don't know if the revolt came from the robots or if they're exploited by the Romulans, Borg, or holograms, so we've briefly discussed that. Holograms is an interesting one. That would be interesting to come across. We've talked potentially, Tony and I have talked potentially about whether or not holograms class as synths and whether or not that will pick up in the series or maybe even season 2. Because we have heard on the grapevine Robert Picardo might come back. So that'd be good if he did come back. Who was the Doctor in Voyager. I also can sympathise with the Admiral's reaction to Picard, though maybe because I work with the public and have had a few conversations with all the clients who seem totally fine, and then all of a sudden take a turn into wow conspiracy theory. So yeah, thanks Jennifer for that. That's made us chuckle. I wouldn't give him a starship just based on his word and no solid evidence, which is again true. That's a perfectly good viewpoint on that. Laris's reaction was also good when she drops those plates. What are you doing? If we don't have any of this TNG crew with him yet, he still needs people who will push back and keep him in check. I think Raffi was probably set up to do that. I think she seems like a character, even though we don't know very much about her, that she'll be one that will take no crap off him, I think. So that'll be good. I totally believe Laris has, and she says actually, I totally believe that Laris has that as well. And I hope that it's seen more of her. Raffi, I think, will have that quality too, as I've just said. And finally, a theory based on nothing substantive. Dr. Jurati is going to be another android created by Maddox. That's where I've seen it. And we've briefly discussed that, so fantastic. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for your comment there. And finally, Zach Moore. Zach Moore said, didn't much care for this one. I found it both boring and confusing. And when it ended, I shouted at the TV, that's it. It's really going to take, it's really going to take Picard a third of the season to get the crew together and get off Earth. Kirk was far more effective in Star Trek 3 than Picard seems to be. The plotline of the Borg ship is really dragging things down, in my opinion. Too many unanswered questions. How did the Romulans get hold of this cube? How long have they had it? What are they hoping to achieve with the research there? Why are they infamously secretive and xenophobic Romulans working alongside other races on this project? And the romance between Narek and Dah's sister is so weak. Are we to believe that after all that awful attempt at meet cute at the end of the last episode, that they hooked up that night and this is the next day? Obviously, Narek has an objective with her, but why would she jump into bed with this random guy she's just met? I did like the scene between Picard and his doctor and the reference to his syndrome from All Good Things. That this person is his doctor, though, doesn't bode well for Beverly Crusher, especially since she wasn't given a name drop at all like the rest of the TNG crew. So that's quite an opposite theory on that with Zach. What did you make to that?
Well, one of the things is I did think is maybe it's not all being shown in chronological order. So the Soji storyline might be actually happening at a different time period than what we're seeing in Picard. There's a real trend for that kind of storytelling at the moment. I just saw a film in the cinema that was told in a different chronological order than it wasn't told chronologically, is what I'm saying. And if anyone's watched The Witcher on Netflix, spoiler, it's not told chronologically. So you only realise after the first 2 or 3 episodes that you're like, oh wait, these things are not happening at the same time to these specific characters. And
Westworld's done that as well, hasn't it?
And it takes some time to get to grips with it. But I didn't assume that Soji had jumped into bed with Zarek right after she just met him. I do agree that I think she is definitely playing with fire. She's obviously sleeping with a man who is saying he has secrets. He's openly saying he's got secrets and telling her nothing. But then she could have secrets of her own, maybe. I don't know. And so, so she's, I guess she's taking a risk there. But I didn't think it was something that was happening immediately. I thought there was some time because they do seem to kind of know each other a bit more by this episode.
Yeah, I felt that. I felt there was a bit of time.
And obviously, although with Picard, these events are happening very close together, it doesn't mean that that's the same thing that's happening in the Borg cube. It's odd that they haven't mentioned Crusher. I think maybe a one mention would definitely help. I assumed, this is just me filling out the blanks with my brain, which is why I like that they don't show us everything, because I can do that with my imagination. But I assumed that they did have some sort of romantic relationship after Nemesis, or that they were somehow together in some way, but that it has not gone well, and that she's
strained or something.
They're estranged or something, and she's doing something else somewhere else in the galaxy or somewhere else on Earth. And you might not want to contact your ex if you need help. You might want to not. Do you know what I mean? So I don't assume that she's dead or anything. And maybe they will mention her later. There might be a reason why they're not bringing her in now. And maybe they won't ever mention her, and we'll just have to assume that she's off living her life somewhere else. So,
but there's also the thought that this Doctor is obviously of an age. Is he in charge of some sort of Federation vetting protocol anyway? Is it not just the fact that this Doctor, any Doctor can declare you fit for Starfleet, or is that his actual remit to do that for anyone? Well,
he's the one who's closest in location to Picard. Let's not forget the Earth is still a planet. Maybe Beverly's off-world, but maybe she's somewhere else on Earth that isn't as close to close to France, close to the Vineyard. Yeah. I think the mention of the Stargazer is nice. We mustn't forget that Beverly's husband served on the Stargazer with Picard and actually died while serving with Picard. So I don't think they're trying to not mention Beverly or dismiss Beverly. I think it's not part of the story right now.
Yeah. That's like what I go back to say. I think that, there's room for one, just for her to appear and nothing could be mentioned, or like you said with the headcanon, there's room for a narrative reason why, and they can fit that, they can retcon that in later seasons if they wanted to bring her back. They did look, Gates did look, was she at the London premiere?
No, she wasn't, but she was at
the LA
one, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm one of these people that, I'm not saying I accept anything that's shown to me on television, cough cough, the X-Files finale, cough cough, but I do tend to fill in the blanks with my own mind. I'm like, okay, well, there could be this reason, there could be that reason. I'm not particularly unhappy if not everything is shown to me.
Yeah,
unless
fantastic.
It doesn't seem to make narrative sense. There's some few problems I had with Discovery in terms of narrative sense.
Yeah, if it's bleedingly obvious, we've mentioned there's a slight retcon in we talked about this in Countdown 3 where Hobart's star exploded in the Star Trek 2009 comic, but they're saying it's the Romulan sun, which is slightly different. So they've retconned that slightly, and I can see why people would get their heckles up with that, because that is a kind of a narrative kind of thing. But also I see, and they're quite right to say this, there's a lot of Discovery style ships and shuttles in Star Trek Picard, and whether or not that's a cost saving issue because they've only got so many assets that they can use, and it is a good way of using the money. That there might be, like you said before, there's a commercial, and there's also a stylistic or actual storytelling point. So I think you can view it from that point. But I do like my headcanon. But anyway, thank you very much, Clara, for coming on and talking this through. Tony will be back next week. He will be doing episode 3. Yeah, so Tony will be back for episode 3 of Star Trek Picard, so we'll be airing that obviously as soon as we can next week. But in the meanwhile, by all means, if you haven't listened to the comics episodes, or you are just about to read the comics, then I would definitely suggest doing that. Have a listen to those. Again, we thank you for everyone who's been listening in. Our download figures have been amazing. Thank you very much for joining us on this journey. In the meantime, though, Clara, where can people find you online? You mentioned about some recordings that you've done. What are you up to, and where can people find you?
So you can find me on Twitter at ClaraJeanMC, and also through my own podcast, The Tales We Tell, which is a podcast exploring the themes of women and gender in film, television, and fiction. And that's The Tales We Tell at The Tales Podcast on Twitter, and also you can find it on iTunes. So I've also been recording with Duncan on a few episodes of Primitive Culture, which is a Trek FM podcast. You can find that on the Trek FM network. And that's about it, really. I'm on Facebook as well, and Instagram, but mainly my podcasting stuff's on Twitter. So, stop over and say hello. Tell me what you think of Picard.
Fantastic. And thank you, everyone, for staying the course. And it's been another long episode. We appreciate that. But there was a lot to dive into. So, and we kind of gathered that. I got a message off Tony the other day saying, yeah, Clara's booked quite a few hours in anticipation. So we knew it was happening. But yeah, thank you very much. You can find me on Twitter, and my handle is at @Muldrakes. It's RMULDRAKE. I shall run the Millennium Podcast, which is at the Time Is Now pod, and also coming very, very shortly, this week, in fact, when you probably hear this, if you listen to this live, the new Pick Up a podcast, which is in the 2nd season, where I interview podcasters about their podcasts. And if you listen to this live, then you will find that I am talking to Matt Latham of Pick a Disc, and that will be happening this week. You can find this podcast on @Jean-Luc Podard on Twitter. And then also, by all means, as I mentioned earlier, come onto our Facebook page, which is Make It So, a Star Trek Picard podcast. And we look forward to seeing you there. So until next time, engage!